The man standing in her doorway looked like death carved from marble, and Fiona Dalton didn't care as long as he could keep her alive long enough to bury her husband properly. His hair fell white as winter snow past his shoulders, stark against the black coat that hung to his knees, and his skin held the pallor of someone who'd never seen sunlight. Strange, yes, but Fiona had stopped questioning strange 3 weeks ago, when Marcus collapsed at their kitchen table with poison burning through his veins and a whispered warning on his lips about the people who would come for her next. "You're the bodyguard," she said, her voice hoarse from crying and screaming in 3 sleepless nights, "the one Dominic sent." The stranger inclined his head, a gesture so antiquated and formal it seemed pulled from another century entirely. His eyes met hers, pale gray, almost silver, and utterly unreadable. He didn't smile, didn't speak, just stood there like a sentinel carved from ice waiting. Fiona stepped aside. "The rate is $2,000 a week, cash. I don't care about your methods. Just keep me breathing until I can figure out who killed my husband and why they want me dead too." He crossed the threshold without a sound, moving with a fluid grace that made her think of predators stalking through tall grass. Up close, he was taller than she'd thought, easily 6'3", with broad shoulders that filled out his coat in a way that suggested considerable strength beneath the elegant exterior. His features were striking in that inhuman way some people possessed, too perfect to be entirely real. Sharp cheekbones, a strong jaw, lips pressed into a firm line. "Do you have a name?" Fiona asked, closing the door and engaging all 3 deadbolts. The 4th lock, the one Marcus had installed himself, stuck as it always did. She jiggled the key with practiced frustration. The stranger reached past her, his hand pale and long-fingered, and turned the lock with a smooth click that made her feel foolish. He still hadn't spoken. "Right," she muttered. "Strong and silent type. Fine. You can call me Mrs. Dalton or Fiona, whichever makes this less awkward. The guest room is upstairs, 2nd door on the left. I assume Dominic told you about the threats?" A single nod. Fiona rubbed her temples, exhaustion making her bones ache. The funeral was tomorrow. Marcus would be lowered into the ground in a mahogany coffin she couldn't afford, and she'd stand there in borrowed black while whoever poisoned him watched from the crowd. Because they would watch, killers always did. "I'm going to make coffee," she said. "You want anything? Food? Water?" She laughed, a bitter sound. "I'm not even sure what bodyguards eat." For the first time something flickered across his face, amusement maybe, or irony. But he shook his head and moved past her into the living room, his gaze sweeping across the space with professional efficiency. Taking stock of exits and windows, she realized. Cataloging threats, Fiona left him to it and retreated to the kitchen, her sanctuary. The coffee maker gurgled to life, filling the silence with something resembling normalcy. She leaned against the counter and let herself shake, just for a moment. Just until the coffee was done. Marcus had been dead for 3 weeks. And she still expected him to walk through the door with that crooked smile and his terrible jokes about her cooking. Expected to hear his voice calling her fee like he'd done since college. Expected to wake up and find this was all some horrible nightmare. Instead, she had a silent white-haired stranger in her living room, and a list of suspects that included everyone from Marcus's business partners to the neighbor who'd complained about their dog. The police said they were investigating, but Fiona knew better. Poison was subtle, professional, the kind of murder that took planning and resources and connections she didn't understand, but Marcus had understood. In those last moments, delirious with pain and dying by inches, he'd gripped her hand and told her to find Dominic Ashford. Told her Dominic would know what to do, who to trust. Told her not to trust anyone else. So she'd called Dominic, a man she'd met exactly twice at company parties, and he'd listened to her story with grave attention before promising to send help. The help had arrived tonight, all 6 feet plus of eerie silence and supernatural grace. Fiona poured her coffee and returned to the living room. The bodyguard stood by the window, pulling the curtains closed with careful precision. His coat had been removed and draped over the back of her sofa, revealing a simple black shirt that clung to a lean, muscled frame. He moved to the next window, then the next, shutting out the night. "The bedroom windows too," Fiona said. "Someone was in the backyard last night. I saw the motion light trigger around 2 a.m. He turned, those pale eyes sharp and focused. A question, though he didn't voice it. "No, I didn't call the police. What am I supposed to say? My husband was murdered and I think someone's stalking me. But you already decided it was an accident, even though we both know poison doesn't accidentally end up in someone's food." She took a long drink of coffee, bitter and black. "They think I'm hysterical, a grieving widow imagining threats." The bodyguard's expression hardened, the first real emotion she'd seen from him. Anger, she thought, or maybe contempt, not for her but for the police who'd dismissed her. He gestured toward the stairs with one elegant hand. A clear message, show me. Fiona led him up to the second floor, hyper-aware of him following behind her like a pale shadow. The master bedroom still smelled like Marcus's cologne, that woody scent she'd bought him last Christmas. She'd stopped sleeping here after the first night alone, unable to bear the empty space beside her. The bodyguard went straight to the window and examined the frame, running his fingers along the edges. He crouched, studying something on the sill that Fiona couldn't see, then straightened and pointed down at the lock. It looked intact to her, but he shook his head slowly. Someone had tampered with it. I sleep in the guest room now, Fiona said quietly, with the door locked and a chair under the handle. He turned to face her, and for a moment something almost like approval crossed his features. Then he gestured toward the guest room where he was supposed to sleep, and then pointed at the floor of the master bedroom. The meaning was clear. He'd stay here, between her and any threat that came through that window. You don't have to, Fiona started, but he'd already dismissed her with a slight shake of his head. The matter was decided. She found herself smiling despite everything. You're bossy for someone who doesn't talk. One pale eyebrow rose, and Fiona could have sworn she saw amusement in those silver eyes. They stood there in her bedroom, this grieving widow and her silent protector, and something shifted in the air between them. Not attraction, Fiona's heart was too raw for that, still bleeding from Marcus's loss, but recognition, understanding. He knew what it was to face danger alone. She could see it in his bearing, and somehow he'd made it his purpose to ensure she didn't have to anymore. Thank you, she said softly, for being here, for believing me. He inclined his head again, that old-world gesture, and Fiona wondered who he was beneath the silence. What circumstances had led him to Dominic Ashford's employ? Why a man who moved like poetry and looked like some Renaissance painter's fever dream had ended up as a bodyguard for hire? But those were questions for another time, when she wasn't running on caffeine and grief and spite. The funeral is at 10, she said. I'll need you there. Whoever killed Marcus, I think they'll show up. I think they'll want to see me suffer. His eyes flashed, something predatory and dangerous surfacing for just an instant. Then he nodded once, a promise. Fiona left him to settle in and retreated to the guest room, the only space in this house that didn't echo with memories. She locked the door and wedged the chair under the handle, muscle memory now. Crawled into bed fully clothed and stared at the ceiling, waiting for sleep that wouldn't come. But for the first time in 3 weeks, she felt safe. The funeral dawned cold and gray, appropriate weather for burying the man she'd loved since she was 22 years old. Fiona, dressed in a black sheath dress that hung too loose on her frame, grief had stolen her appetite along with her husband and pinned her dark hair into a severe bun. No makeup. She didn't want to bother with repairing tear-stained mascara. The bodyguard waited downstairs, looking like he'd stepped out of a gothic romance novel. Black suit tailored perfectly to his lean frame, white hair pulled back at his nape, that pale skin luminous in the weak morning light filtering through the windows. He'd been awake when she'd ventured down at 6 a.m. to make coffee, standing by the front window like he'd never moved. Maybe he hadn't. Do you sleep? Fiona asked, pouring 2 cups more from habit than anything. He took the offered cup with a small nod of thanks but didn't drink, just held it, warming his hands. When he set it down untouched a few minutes later, Fiona filed that away with all the other oddities she'd noticed. Didn't eat, didn't sleep, didn't make a sound when he moved. Dominic had sent her a ghost. The drive to the cemetery was silent. The bodyguard drove her car with the same fluid competence he brought to everything, navigating the morning traffic without visible effort. Fiona watched the city pass by the coffee shop where she and Marcus had their first date, the park where he'd proposed, the whole geography of their life together, and felt the grief crash over her in waves. By the time they pulled up to the cemetery gates, she was shaking. The bodyguard killed the engine and turned to face her, those silver eyes patient and calm. He reached across the console and took her hand. His skin was cool, almost cold, but his grip was steady and real. Anchoring. Fiona squeezed back gratefully. I can do this, she whispered, more to herself than to him. He nodded, absolute certainty in his expression. Yes, you can. The service was small. Marcus's parents, her own mother, a handful of colleagues from his software company, and a scattering of friends who'd shown up to pay respects. The bodyguard stood slightly behind Fiona, a pale sentinel in the midst of the mourners. She could feel him there, a constant presence watching. The priest spoke in platitudes about God's plan and eternal rest. Fiona stopped listening. She focused on the coffin, polished mahogany gleaming in the weak sunlight, and thought about Marcus's last words. Find Dominic Ashford. Don't trust anyone else. What had her husband been involved in that had gotten him killed? He was a software engineer, brilliant with code but hopeless with anything mechanical. He'd paid their bills on time, loved terrible action movies, and made her laugh every single day. What secrets could he possibly have harbored? Movement caught her eye. A man stood at the edge of the gathering, half hidden behind a marble angel, tall, dark-haired, watching with too much intensity. Fiona didn't recognize him, which meant he didn't belong here. The bodyguard had seen him too. She felt him shift, his attention sharpening to a razor's edge. The stranger noticed, met the bodyguard's stare, and something passed between them. Some wordless communication that made the stranger's eyes widen fractionally before he turned and walked away, disappearing among the headstones. Fiona's heart hammered. The bodyguard's hand came to rest lightly on her shoulder, a gesture of reassurance and warning both. Stay close. The service ended. People approached with condolences that washed over Fiona like white noise. She smiled automatically, thanked them mechanically, and counted the seconds until she could escape. The bodyguard never left her side, a pale shadow that made some of the mourners glance twice and whisper. Let them whisper. She needed him more than she needed their approval. Marcus's business partner, Gerald Finch, approached last. He was a thick-set man in his 50s with thinning hair and watery blue eyes. Fiona, my dear, I'm so terribly sorry. Marcus was like a son to me. Thank you, Gerald. She kept her voice neutral. Marcus had never liked Gerald much, had complained about his business practices and ethical shortcuts, but they'd been partners for 5 years, bound together by contracts and shared projects. Gerald glanced at the bodyguard and frowned. Is this security, Fiona? Are you in some kind of trouble? Just being cautious, she said carefully. You can't be too safe these days. Of course. But Gerald's expression had shifted, something calculating entering his gaze. Listen, we should talk soon about Marcus's shares in the company. There are decisions that need to be made, papers to sign. I know this is a difficult time, but business won't wait forever. The bodyguard went very still beside her, a predator catching scent of prey. Give me a week, Fiona said. Then we can meet. Gerald nodded, patted her arm with damp fingers, and waddled off toward the parking lot. The bodyguard watched him go with narrowed eyes. You think it was him, Fiona murmured, too low for anyone else to hear. You think Gerald killed Marcus? The bodyguard didn't respond, but he didn't need to. She could see the suspicion written in every line of his body. They left the cemetery as the coffin was being lowered into the earth. Fiona couldn't watch that final moment, couldn't bear to see Marcus disappear into the ground forever. The bodyguard drove them home in silence, taking a different route than they'd used that morning. Checking for tails, she realized, making sure they weren't followed. This is insane, Fiona said as they pulled into her driveway. 3 weeks ago I was planning our anniversary trip to Ireland. Now I'm attending Marcus's funeral with a bodyguard and suspecting his business partner of murder. How did this become my life? The bodyguard parked and turned off the engine. He reached into his coat and pulled out a slim phone, typed something quickly and showed her the screen. You are stronger than you know. Survive first. Grieve later, Fiona laughed, a broken sound. Is that supposed to be inspiring? He typed again. Yes, you're ridiculous. But she was smiling despite the tears on her cheeks. Come on. I need to get out of this dress and figure out what the hell Marcus was hiding inside. Fiona changed into jeans and an oversized sweater while the bodyguard swept the house, checking every room and window. She found him in Marcus's office, standing in front of the massive corkboard where her husband had pinned photos and notes and diagrams she'd never understood. His work stuff, Fiona said from the doorway. I never paid much attention. Marcus said it was boring technical documentation for projects at the company. The bodyguard studied the board with intensity, then turned to face her. He pointed at the photos. Several showed Gerald Finch. Others showed people Fiona didn't recognize, then made a gesture like connecting dots. You think Marcus was investigating something, Fiona said slowly. Something involving Gerald. A nod. Fiona moved closer, really looking at the board for the first time. Marcus had organized it like a detective's murder board, with red string connecting various elements. In the center was a photo of a building she recognized, the downtown office where Gerald's company operated. Surrounding it were financial documents, bank statements, and what looked like email printouts. Oh God, Fiona breathed. Marcus found something. Something bad enough to kill him over. The bodyguard was already photographing the board with his phone, methodically capturing every detail. When he finished, he turned to the desk and began opening drawers with swift efficiency. Is this legal? Fiona asked weakly. He gave her a look that clearly said he didn't care. Fair enough. She joined him, searching through Marcus's things with growing desperation. There had to be more, some explanation for why her husband had been playing detective in his spare time. Some clue to what had gotten him killed. The bodyguard found at first a flash drive taped to the underside of the bottom drawer. He held it up triumphantly, then gestured toward the computer on the desk. Fiona booted up Marcus's machine, her hands shaking as she entered his password. The flash drive contained a single folder labeled Insurance, which felt ominous as hell. Inside were dozens of files, spreadsheets, scanned documents, email chains, and video files. The bodyguard leaned over her shoulder as she opened the first spreadsheet. It took Fiona a moment to understand what she was looking at, but when she did, her blood went cold. He was embezzling, she whispered. Gerald was embezzling millions from the company. The spreadsheet detailed years of fraudulent transactions, money siphoned from client accounts into offshore holdings. Marcus had documented everything, building an airtight case against his business partner. The emails showed him confronting Gerald 2 months ago, demanding he return the stolen funds and turn himself in. Gerald's response had been brief: "Mind your own business or you'll regret it." Marcus threatened to go to the authorities, Fiona said, clicking through more files. He gave Gerald a deadline: return the money by September 1st or he'd take the evidence to the police. Her voice broke. September 1st was 3 weeks ago, the day Marcus died. The bodyguard's hand settled on her shoulder, a grounding weight. When she looked up at him, his eyes were gentle despite their inhuman pallor, patient, letting her process. "Gerald killed him," Fiona said flatly. "Gerald poisoned my husband to keep him quiet about the embezzlement. And now I'm a loose end because Marcus might have told me something." The bodyguard nodded grimly. He took the mouse from her hand and opened one of the video files. Security footage, Fiona realized, from the office building. The timestamp showed it was from the day Marcus died. The video showed Gerald entering Marcus's office around 3 p.m., carrying a coffee cup. He set it on Marcus's desk. They spoke briefly and Gerald left. Marcus returned to his desk 20 minutes later and drank the coffee while working. An hour after that, he packed up his things and came home, where the poison hit him in full. "That bastard," Fiona breathed. "He murdered Marcus in cold blood for money." The bodyguard ejected the flash drive and pocketed it. Then he typed another message on his phone. "We take this to the police. Gerald will be arrested." "No," Fiona said, surprising herself with the vehemence in her voice. "No, if we go to the police, Gerald will lawyer up. He'll claim the evidence is fake, that Marcus was the embezzler. He's got money and connections. He'll tie this up in courts for years. Marcus deserves justice faster than that." The bodyguard regarded her with something like respect. "What do you suggest?" "I want to confront him," Fiona said. "I want to look Gerald in the eye and tell him I know what he did. I want him to understand that he didn't get away with it." "Dangerous," the bodyguard typed. "That's why I have you." Fiona stood, surprising herself with her own conviction. The grief was still there, a constant ache in her chest, but it had crystallized into something harder, colder. "Gerald thinks I'm just a widow who'll sign whatever papers he puts in front of me. He thinks I'm helpless. Let's prove him wrong." The bodyguard studied her for a long moment, those silver eyes searching her face for something. Whatever he found must have satisfied him, because he nodded once. Agreement. They spent the rest of the day planning. Fiona called Gerald's assistant and scheduled a meeting for the following afternoon, citing her readiness to discuss Marcus's shares in the company. The bodyguard made calls of his own, speaking in a language Fiona didn't recognize, something Eastern European maybe, all harsh consonants and rolling vowels. His voice was a revelation, deep and resonant, and accented in ways that made her think of old castles and older bloodlines. "So you can talk," Fiona said when he ended the call. He glanced at her, almost apologetic, and typed on his phone, "Prefer not to. Talking complicates things." "What language was that? You're a long way from home." "Not really. Home is complicated." Fiona wanted to ask more, to dig into the mystery of this silent protector who'd appeared in her life at the worst possible moment, but exhaustion was catching up with her. The adrenaline from discovering Marcus's evidence had faded, leaving her hollow and wrung out. The bodyguard saw it in her face. He gestured toward the stairs, toward rest, but Fiona shook her head. "Every time I close my eyes, I see Marcus dying. I see him in pain, and I couldn't help him, couldn't save him, couldn't do anything but watch him slip away." Her voice cracked. "I was supposed to protect him. We promised each other when we got married, in sickness and health, till death do us part. I failed." The bodyguard crossed the room in 3 silent strides and took her hands in his. His skin was cool, but his grip was firm, real, alive. He waited until she met his eyes, then shook his head slowly, deliberately. "No. I did fail," Fiona insisted. "He died because I wasn't smart enough to see the danger, wasn't strong enough to—" He pressed a finger to her lips, silencing her. Then he typed on his phone with his free hand, somehow managing it one-handed. "You did not fail. He was poisoned by a coward. You could not have known. You could not have stopped it. His death is not your fault." Tears spilled down Fiona's cheeks. Then why does it feel like it is? Because you loved him. Because grief lies and tells us we should have done more. But you did everything you could. Now you honor him by seeking justice. Who are you? Fiona whispered. Really? You're not just some bodyguard. Dominic didn't find you in the yellow pages. The bodyguard hesitated, something conflicted crossing his face. Then he typed carefully. Someone who understands loss. Someone who has failed people he loved. Someone will not let it happen again. There was pain in those words, old and deep and carefully buried. Fiona squeezed his hands, this strange pale man who'd become her anchor in the storm. Thank you, she said. For being here, for helping me. He brought her hands to his lips and kissed her knuckles, a gesture so courtly and antiquated it belonged in a different century. Then he released her gently and typed, Rest, I will watch over you. And somehow, with him standing guard, Fiona managed to sleep. The meeting with Gerald was set for 2 p.m. at his office downtown. Fiona dressed carefully, a navy suit that Marcus had always said made her look professional and powerful. She needed both today. The bodyguard wore another immaculate black suit, his white hair loose around his shoulders, looking like some avenging angel carved from ice. They drove in silence. Fiona clutched the flash drive in her pocket like a talisman, rehearsing what she'd say. How she'd confront a man who'd murdered her husband for money. Part of her wanted to scream at Gerald, to claw his eyes out and make him hurt the way Marcus had hurt. But the smarter part, the part that had gotten her through 3 weeks of hell, knew calm and cold would be more effective. The office building was a modern steel and glass structure downtown, all sharp edges and reflective surfaces. Gerald's company occupied the entire 15th floor. The receptionist barely glanced at them before waving them toward the conference room where Gerald waited. He stood when they entered, all false sympathy and oily concern. Fiona, thank you for coming. I know this must be difficult. His eyes slid to the bodyguard and narrowed. I thought this would be a private meeting. He stays, Fiona said, taking a seat at the conference table. He's my security consultant. You said we needed to discuss business, Gerald. Let's discuss. Gerald settled back into his chair, clearly unhappy but trying to hide it. Of course, as Marcus's widow, you've inherited his 40% stake in the company. I'd like to buy you out at clean break fair market value. You'll receive a substantial sum and can move on with your life without the burden of business management. How substantial? Fiona asked. $2 million, very generous, considering the company's current valuation. Fiona smiled. The company is worth at least $20 million, Gerald. 40% would be $8 million. You're trying to lowball me. Gerald's expression tightened. The valuation is complicated. There are debts, outstanding contracts. There are no debts, Fiona interrupted. The company is profitable and growing. I've done my research. She leaned forward. I've also found something interesting in Marcus's files. Want to see? She pulled out the flash drive and set it on the table between them. Gerald went pale, staring at the small device like it was a bomb. That's, he started then stopped. Evidence, Fiona finished, of embezzlement spanning 5 years, of threats, of murder. Gerald stood abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor. I don't know what you think you've found, but… Sit down, the bodyguard said, his first words in Gerald's presence. His voice was cold and absolute, carrying an authority that made Gerald freeze mid-step. There was something in that voice, something that prickled at the base of Fiona's spine. Power, old and vast and utterly controlled. Gerald heard it too. He sank back into his chair like a puppet with cut strings. You poisoned my husband, Fiona said quietly. You put toxin in his coffee because he discovered you'd been stealing from the company, from clients. You killed him to cover your crimes. You can't prove that, Gerald said, but his voice shook. The flash drive has security footage of you bringing Marcus coffee the day he died. It has emails where you threatened him. It has financial records showing exactly how you embezzled $14 million over 5 years. Fiona's voice was steady, cold. I can prove all of it. Gerald's face twisted into something ugly. Even if that's true, what are you going to do? Go to the police? I'll claim Marcus was the embezzler, that he framed me. I have lawyers, Fiona. I have friends in the DA's office. You're nobody, a grieving widow with wild accusations and probably forged evidence. Maybe, Fiona allowed. Or maybe I go to the press. Maybe I contact every client you've stolen from and show them the proof. Maybe I destroy your reputation so thoroughly that no amount of lawyering will save you. You vindictive little, Gerald started, half rising from his chair. The bodyguard moved with inhuman speed, suddenly between Gerald and Fiona despite having been across the room a moment before. One pale hand gripped Gerald's shoulder and pushed him back down with casual, terrifying strength. Touch her and die, the bodyguard said softly. His eyes had changed. The silver irises now held flecks of red, bright and predatory. Threaten her again and I will end you in ways that will make you beg for the mercy of prison. Gerald gasped, staring up at the bodyguard with naked fear. What are you? Fiona's protection, the bodyguard said. Her vengeance, if necessary. Choose your next words carefully, Mr. Finch. The air in the conference room had gone cold, frost actually forming on the windows. Fiona's breath misted in front of her face. Gerald trembled in his chair, pinned by the bodyguard's grip and those terrible red-flecked eyes. Here's what's going to happen, Fiona said, finding her voice. You're going to confess. You're going to return every penny you stole. You're going to turn yourself in to the police and tell them you poisoned Marcus. And if you do all of that, I won't let my bodyguard do whatever it is he's clearly dying to do to you. And if I refuse? Gerald managed. The bodyguard smiled, showing teeth that seemed too sharp, too white. Then I demonstrate exactly why you should have accepted her mercy. Gerald broke. He slumped in his chair, decades seeming to fall away until he looked ancient and small. I didn't mean to kill him, he whispered. I just wanted him to get sick, to be distracted while I cleaned up the evidence. But the dose was wrong, the poison too strong. I didn't mean for him to die. But he did die, Fiona said, her voice hard as stone. He died in agony, poisoned by someone he trusted. And you would have killed me too, wouldn't you, to tie up loose ends? Gerald didn't answer, which was answer enough. Fiona stood, suddenly exhausted and sick. I'm going to the police right now. You can come willingly or my bodyguard can persuade you. But either way, you're going to face justice for what you did. I'll be ruined, Gerald said dully. You should have thought of that before you murdered my husband. The bodyguard hauled Gerald to his feet, still gripping his shoulder. The older man didn't resist, all the fight gone out of him. They made a strange procession through the office, Fiona leading, Gerald stumbling in the middle, the bodyguard herding him along like some pale supernatural shepherd. The police station was 6 blocks away. They walked, the bodyguard having called ahead on his phone to arrange for someone to meet them. Detective Sarah Martinez was waiting at the entrance, a sharp-eyed woman in her 40s who listened to Fiona's story with growing interest. You have evidence? She asked. Fiona handed over the flash drive. Everything Marcus gathered before Gerald killed him. Financial records, emails, security footage. It's all there. Detective Martinez plugged the drive into her laptop and spent 20 minutes reviewing the files. When she looked up, her expression was grim. Mr. Finch, you're under arrest for embezzlement and suspicion of murder. You have the right to remain silent. Fiona stopped listening. It was done. Gerald was in custody, the evidence secured, Marcus's murder being taken seriously at last. She'd done what she'd promised, gotten justice for her husband. So why did she feel so hollow? The bodyguard guided her gently out of the police station and into the afternoon sunlight. Fiona blinked, disoriented. It was only 4 p.m., but it felt like years had passed since this morning. I need a drink, she said. Or 12. The bodyguard's lips quirked in what might have been a smile. He typed on his phone, I know a place. The place turned out to be a small wine bar tucked into a quiet street, all exposed brick and candlelight despite the afternoon hour. The bodyguard led her to a booth in the back, ordered wine in that Romanian-accented voice, and settled across from her like a pale ghost in the shadows. Fiona drained her first glass in 3 long swallows. The second she sipped more slowly, letting the alcohol warm her from the inside out. Thank you, she said finally, for everything. For protecting me. For helping me confront Gerald, for not letting me fall apart completely. The bodyguard inclined his head. You are stronger than you believe, he typed. I don't feel strong. I feel like I'm held together with duct tape and spite. Spite is underrated. It kept me alive for centuries. Fiona blinked. Centuries? That's a joke, right? The bodyguard's expression was carefully neutral. He typed slowly, as if choosing each word with precision. What do you know about vampires? The question hung in the air between them. Fiona laughed, then stopped when she saw he wasn't laughing with her. You're serious. A nod. Vampires are real. Another nod. And you're. Fiona couldn't finish the sentence. It was absurd. Impossible. Except it explained everything: the pale skin, the white hair, the way he moved in perfect silence, the inhuman speed and strength, the fact that she'd never seen him eat or sleep or even breathe heavily. The red flecks in his eyes when he'd threatened Gerald. The cold that had filled the conference room. Oh my God, she breathed. You're a vampire. He waited, patient and still, for her to process. Fiona drained her second glass and poured a third with shaking hands. Dominic sent me a vampire as a bodyguard, yes. Why? Because human bodyguards easily, vampire bodyguards do not. That's practical. Fiona laughed again, a slightly hysterical sound. Okay. My bodyguard is a vampire. My life has officially entered horror movie territory. The bodyguard's eyes softened with something like sympathy. He typed, I will not hurt you. I have profited you. That will not change. I know, Fiona said, and realized she meant it. Whatever he was, he'd kept her safe. He'd helped her find justice for Marcus. He'd been patient and kind and steady when her world was falling apart. I trust you, which is insane, but there it is. What do you want to know? Everything, Fiona said immediately. Are you going to bite me? Do you sparkle? Can you turn into a bat? Do you have some tragic backstory involving a lost love? She paused. Actually, that last one seems statistically likely given your general vibe. The bodyguard's shoulders shook with silent laughter. He typed rapidly. No biting unless you ask, no sparkling, no bat transformation. Yes to tragic backstory. I'm sorry, Fiona said, sobering. That was insensitive. He waved off her apology and continued typing. I am old. Very old. I have lost many people I cared for to time and violence. It is the curse of immortality. Everyone you love eventually leaves. That sounds lonely. It is. He hesitated, then added, you remind me of someone. A woman I failed to protect long ago. When Dominic asked for help, I could not refuse. Dominic knows what you are? Dominic is my friend. One of the few humans I trust completely. Fiona processed this. How old are you? Actually, never mind. That's probably rude. Do you have a name? An actual name? I can't just keep calling you Bodyguard in my head. He typed 2 words, Felix Andros. Felix, Fiona repeated, testing the shape of it. That's a good name. Solid, fits you. Felix's eyes warmed with something that might have been pleasure. He typed, I have not used it in some time. Most know me by other titles now. What kind of titles? He hesitated, clearly debating how much to reveal. Finally he typed, I am what my kind call a king, the eldest of our line. The one who makes laws and settles disputes and protects our people from discovery. Fiona stared at him. You're the vampire king, yes. And you're working as my bodyguard. It is not so strange. Even kings need pert beyond politics. But you could have sent anyone. You could have sent 100 vampires to protect me. Why come yourself? Felix met her eyes and there was something raw in his gaze. Vulnerable. Because I am tired of losing people. Because you deserved better than to die in your home. Afraid and alone. Because I saw your grief and recognize it as my own. Fiona's throat tightened. Felix. He shook his head, not wanting sympathy. Dominic told me about your husband. About the poison. I have seen too many good people die to coets. I wanted to ensure you did not join them. You barely know me. I know you are brave. I know you loved your husband. You desist justice despite the danger. I know you trusted a stranger to protect you when you had every reason not to. He paused, then added quietly, that is enough. They sat in silence for a moment, the weight of revelation settling between them. Fiona felt like the world had tilted sideways. Vampires were real. The vampire king was sitting across from her drinking wine he probably couldn't taste, and her husband's murder had somehow tangled her life with immortal politics she didn't understand. What happens now? She asked. Gerald's under arrest. Marcus's killer will face trial. I don't need a bodyguard anymore. Something flickered across Felix's face, disappointment maybe, or regret. He typed, I will leave if you wish. My duty is fulfilled. That's not what I asked, Fiona said. I asked what happens now, not whether you're leaving. Do you want me to stay? Yes, Fiona said, surprising herself with the immediacy of her answer. I mean, if you want to. You probably have king things to do, vampire politics to manage. I don't want to keep you from. Felix reached across the table and took her hand, silencing her rambling. His skin was cool against hers, his grip gentle but firm. He typed one-handed, I would like to stay. Okay then, Fiona said softly. Stay. The next few weeks passed in a strange new rhythm. Gerald was denied bail and sat in jail awaiting trial, the evidence against him overwhelming. Detective Martinez kept Fiona updated on the case, and it became clear Gerald would spend the rest of his life in prison for embezzlement and murder both. Justice served cold and absolute. Felix remained a constant presence in Fiona's life. During the day he stayed in the master bedroom with the curtains drawn, sleeping though he insisted vampires didn't sleep the way humans did, just entered a sort of restorative stillness. At night he emerged, helping Fiona sort through Marcus's affairs and put her life back together piece by piece. They developed a comfortable companionship, this grieving widow and the vampire king. Felix cooked elaborate meals he couldn't eat, just to watch Fiona enjoy them. Fiona read aloud to him from novels, learning his taste ran to historical fiction and philosophy. They watched terrible movies and good ones, argued about music, and slowly, carefully, became friends. But there was something else growing between them too. Something Fiona tried not to examine too closely because it felt like a betrayal of Marcus's memory. The way her heart beat faster when Felix entered a room, the way his rare smiles felt like sunlight breaking through clouds, the way she caught herself watching him, admiring the elegant lines of his face and the grace in his movements. It wasn't love. Not yet. Marcus had been dead only 2 months, and Fiona's grief was still too raw for her heart to be ready for more. But it was the possibility of love, The first green shoots of something that might grow given time and care. Felix felt it too, she thought. She caught him watching her sometimes with an expression so tender it made her chest ache. He found excuses to touch her a hand at the small of her back, fingers brushing hers when he handed her coffee. Casual intimacy that felt like more, but he never pushed, never demanded. Patient as only an immortal could be. 2 months after Marcus's funeral, Fiona woke screaming from a nightmare. She'd dreamed of her husband dying over and over, each death more horrible than the last, and she couldn't shake the images. Couldn't breathe past the panic. Felix was there in seconds, pulling her into his arms and holding her while she shook. He murmured to her in Romanian, words she didn't understand but found comforting anyway. Low and soothing, a rumble in his chest that gradually slowed her racing heart. "I'm sorry," Fiona gasped when she could speak again. "I'm sorry, I thought I was getting better, but shh," Felix said, one of his rare vocalizations. "Grief does not follow a schedule, it ambushes us when we least expect." Fiona laughed wetly. "Speaking from experience? Centuries of it." He smoothed her hair back from her face, his touch impossibly gentle. "I lost my mortal family to plague in 1348. I still dream of them sometimes. Still wake expecting to hear my sister's laugh or my mother's voice. That's God, Felix, that's horrible. It is the price of immortality we endure. We carry our dead with us always." He tilted her face up, meeting her eyes in the darkness. "But we also learn to live again. To find joy despite loss. To honor those we loved by continuing on." "Is that what you're doing?" Fiona whispered. "Living again?" "With you, yes." Felix's thumb traced her cheekbone, catching a tear. "You have reminded me what it is to care for someone, to want to see them happy, to fear for their safety and feel relief at their smile. I had forgotten these things, Felix." "I know it is too soon," he continued. "I know you are still mourning your husband, and rightly so. I do not ask for anything from you, Fiona. I simply want you to know that you have become precious to me, important. And when you are ready, if you are ever ready, I will be here." Fiona's breath caught. "You're the vampire king. I'm just a widow trying to survive. We don't make sense." "No," Felix agreed. "We do not make sense at all, and yet here we are." He was so close, his face inches from hers in the darkness. It would be easy to close that distance, to kiss him and see what happened. But Fiona couldn't. Not yet. Marcus's memory still held too much of her heart. "I need time," she said. "I have nothing but time." Felix pressed a kiss to her forehead, chaste and sweet. "Sleep, Fiona, I will stay with you. The nightmares will not return while I am here." He settled on top of the covers beside her, solid and real and safe. Fiona curled against his side, her head on his shoulder, and let herself relax into his presence. He was cool to the touch, his body lacking the warmth of living blood, but somehow that made it easier. Different from Marcus in every way. Not a replacement, but something new. She slept without dreams, protected by the Vampire King's vigil. Time passed. Autumn gave way to winter, the first snow falling on a city that never quite stopped moving. Gerald's trial was scheduled for January, and Fiona prepared to testify. Felix accompanied her to meetings with the prosecutor, a silent pale shadow that made the lawyers nervous and the detective Martinez thoughtful. "Your bodyguard," Martinez said one afternoon when Felix had stepped out to take a call. "He's not quite human, is he?" Fiona's heart skipped. "What makes you say that?" 20 years as a detective, you develop instincts. He doesn't move right, doesn't breathe right, and I've never once seen him during daylight hours." Martinez studied Fiona with sharp eyes. "I'm not going to ask what he is, I don't think I want to know. But he cares about you. That much is obvious." "He does," Fiona said softly. "And you care about him?" "Yes." The admission felt like both a relief and a betrayal. "I do." "Is that wrong? Marcus has only been gone 4 months and I'm already..." "Already what? Feeling alive again? Letting yourself be happy?" Martinez shook her head. "Mrs. Dalton, your husband was murdered. That's a trauma that rewrites everything. However you survive it, whatever helps you heal, that's not wrong. It's human. Even if what's helping me heal is decidedly not human." Martinez smiled. "Especially then," Felix returned, and the meeting continued. But Fiona couldn't stop thinking about the detective's words. She'd been holding herself back, refusing to acknowledge her growing feelings for Felix because she thought it dishonored Marcus's memory. But maybe Martinez was right. Maybe healing wasn't a betrayal. Maybe moving forward was exactly what Marcus would have wanted for her. That night, after Felix had made dinner and they'd settled in the living room with wine and conversation, Fiona made a decision. "Tell me about your family," she said. "The ones you lost to plague." Felix looked surprised but set down his phone. When he spoke aloud, his voice was careful, dredging up memories long buried. "I had 2 sisters and a brother. I was the eldest. My parents were merchants, comfortable but not wealthy. We lived in a town called Brasov, in what is now Romania." "What were they like?" "My mother was fierce and clever, always negotiating the best prices at market. My father was gentle, a mediocre businessman but an excellent father. My brother wanted to be a knight, foolish boy. My sisters, he smiled, sad and distant. They were twins, inseparable. Elena and Adriana. They sang constantly, drove everyone mad with it. You loved them very much. I did. When the plague came, I tried to protect them. I was already vampire by then, turned years earlier in circumstances I do not speak of, and I thought my power could shield them from illness. But plague does not care for supernatural intervention. I watched them die one by one, helpless to stop it. Fiona moved closer, taking his hand. I'm so sorry. It was 700 years ago. The pain has dulled to an old ache. Felix squeezed her fingers. But I remember them. I keep their memory alive. That is all we can do for those we lose. Remember them, honor them, carry them forward. Is that what I should do with Marcus? I think you are already doing it. You sought justice for him. You lived when it would have been easier to give up. You are here, breathing and fighting and surviving. That honors him more than any monument. Fiona felt tears prick her eyes. I think I'm ready. Ready for what? To stop holding back. She shifted closer until she could feel the coolness radiating from his skin. You said when I was ready, you would be here. I'm ready, Felix. I'm ready to try again, to see what this could be between us. Felix went very still. Fiona, I do not want you to rush into something you will regret. I'm not rushing. I've been thinking about this for weeks. You've been patient and kind, and you've helped me through the worst thing that ever happened to me. I care about you. A lot. And I think Marcus would want me to be happy. With you or anyone else, he'd want me to live. You honor his memory by saying so. Then honor me by not making me throw myself at you repeatedly, Fiona said, managing a smile despite the tears on her cheeks. Kiss me, Felix, please. He cupped her face in both hands, his touch cool and reverent. Are you certain? I've never been more certain of anything. Felix kissed her finally, and it was nothing like kissing Marcus had been. His lips were cool, his touch careful as if she might break, and there was an old-world courtliness to the way he held her that made her feel cherished, precious. The kiss deepened slowly, heat building despite his lack of body warmth, and when they finally broke apart, Fiona was breathless. Okay, she said shakily. That was okay? Felix smiled, a real smile that transformed his face from austere to beautiful. Just okay? Shut up and kiss me again. He did, pulling her into his lap and kissing her until she forgot her own name. Forgot the grief that had been her constant companion for 4 months. Forgot everything except the feel of his hands in her hair and his lips on hers, and the way he murmured her name like a prayer. They didn't take it further that night, both of them aware it was too soon for more, but they stayed tangled together on the couch until dawn threatened, talking and kissing and learning each other in new ways. Felix told her about his long life, the kingdoms he'd seen rise and fall, the wonders and horrors of 7 centuries. Fiona told him about her life with Marcus, the happiness and the mundane struggles, and found she could speak of her husband without breaking. I will always love him, she said as the sky began to lighten. He was my first love, my partner. Part of my heart belongs to him forever. I would never ask you to forget him, Felix said. Love is not a finite resource. We do not betray the dead by loving the living. You're very wise for someone who spends his days sleeping in a dark room. Felix laughed, the sound rusty but genuine. 700 years provides ample time for philosophy. Come on, old man. You need to get to bed before the sun comes up. Fiona stood, pulling him with her. Will you stay with me? Just to sleep? Always, Felix promised and followed her upstairs. They settled into bed together, Fiona curled against Felix's side, and it felt right, natural, like this was where they were supposed to be. Thank you, Fiona whispered as sleep claimed her. For everything. Felix pressed a kiss to her hair, already sinking into his strange vampire rest. Thank you for trusting me, Dragomir. Fiona didn't know what the Romanian words meant, but they sounded like an endearment, and that was enough. The trial happened in January, a grim affair that lasted 3 days. Fiona testified about Marcus's murder, about the evidence they'd found, about Gerald's threats and confession. The jury deliberated for less than 2 hours before returning with a guilty verdict on all counts. Gerald was sentenced to life in prison without parole. When the judge read the sentence, Fiona felt something inside her finally release. Justice served and complete. Marcus could rest now. She could rest now. Felix waited outside the courthouse, standing in the shadows despite the weak winter sun. Fiona went to him, letting him pull her into his arms, and breathed in his scent, something like snow and old stone and safety. It's over, she said. It is over, Felix agreed. You did well, Dragomir. Your husband would be proud. I think he would. I think he'd be glad I found you too. Felix pulled back to look at her, his silver eyes searching. You think so? I know so. Marcus always wanted me to be happy even after he was gone. He told me once, years ago, that if anything happened to him I should find someone else. Should live and love and not waste my life grieving. Fiona smiled through tears. He'd probably think you're too old for me, but he'd approve anyway. I am definitely too old for you. Good thing I like older men. Felix laughed and kissed her there in front of the courthouse, gentle and sure. When they broke apart, Fiona felt lighter than she had in months. The grief was still there, it would always be there. A scar on her heart, but it no longer consumed her. She could breathe around it now, could see a future beyond it. Take me home, she said. Our home, because that's what the house had become. Not just her space or Marcus's memory, but the home she shared with Felix. The place where they were building something new together. Felix drove them through the city, his pale hand warm in hers despite his cool skin. Back to the house where this had all begun, where a grieving widow had opened her door to a silent bodyguard and found salvation. That night they made love for the first time. Felix was careful and thorough, treating Fiona like she was made of spun glass and starlight. He mapped every inch of her with cool lips and gentle hands, murmuring Romanian endearments that made her shiver. And when they finally joined, moving together in the darkness of her bedroom, Fiona felt something inside her heal. This wasn't forgetting Marcus. This was honoring his memory by choosing to live fully, by opening her heart to love again even when she'd thought she never could. Afterward, they lay tangled together, Fiona tracing patterns on Felix's chest. What does Draga Mia mean? She asked. My darling, Felix said, his voice soft in the darkness. My precious one. I like that. Fiona pressed a kiss over his silent heart. Say something else in Romanian, Iubesc, Felix murmured, threading his fingers through her hair. It means I love you. Fiona's breath caught. They'd been building toward this for months, but hearing the words still stole her voice for a moment. Then she found it. Found her courage and said, I love you too. Is that okay? To love you while still loving Marcus? More than okay, it is beautiful. Felix tilted her face up, his eyes luminous in the dark. The heart is not a room with space for only one person, it is a home with infinite rooms, each love its own space. You loved your husband. You love him still, and now you love me too. All of this is true, all of this is right. When did you get so good with words? I have had 700 years to practice. Felix kissed her, slow and deep. But truly, Fiona, I am humbled by your love. I did not think I would find this again. Did not think I deserved it. Why wouldn't you deserve it? His expression darkened. I am a monster, however civilized. I drink blood to survive. I have killed many times over the centuries. I am not the shining knight from fairy tales. No, Fiona agreed. You're the vampire king who became my bodyguard because you couldn't stand the thought of another innocent person dying. You're the man who held me while I cried and helped me find justice for my husband. You're the one who made me want to live again. That's not a monster, Felix. That's a hero. I am no hero. You're mine, Fiona said firmly. My hero, my love, my vampire king. Felix's eyes brightened, red flecks dancing in the silver. Yours, he agreed. For as long as you will have me. That could be a very long time. I'm stubborn. Good. I prefer stubborn. They made love again, slower this time, learning each other's bodies and preferences. Felix was attentive and inventive, 700 years of experience evident in every touch. Fiona felt worshipped, adored, treasured, and when she finally fell asleep in his arms as dawn broke, she felt at peace for the first time since Marcus's death. The months that followed were the happiest of Fiona's life. She and Felix settled into their strange domestic partnership, figuring out how a mortal woman and an immortal vampire king could build a life together. Felix introduced her to his world, the hidden vampire courts beneath the city, the elaborate politics of immortal society, the other vampires who served him and eyed Fiona with varying degrees of suspicion and curiosity. Fiona held her own in that world, surprising everyone. She'd survived tragedy and come out stronger, and she wasn't about to be intimidated by vampires who thought humans were lesser. Felix watched her navigate vampire politics with pride, his queen in all but name, because that's what she was becoming, Fiona realized. Not just Felix's lover but his partner, his equal. The vampires might have immortality and power, but Fiona had courage and intelligence, and the kind of strength that came from surviving the worst and choosing to keep going. 6 months after Gerald's conviction, Felix took Fiona to his true home, a castle hidden in the Carpathian Mountains, ancient and beautiful and utterly his. They walked through halls lined with portraits of people long dead, and Felix told her stories of his life before her. The lonely centuries, the losses, the burden of kingship. It's a lot, Fiona said, standing in the great hall that had been built in the 1200s. The responsibility, the weight of all these years. It is, Felix agreed, but it is easier with you beside me. Fiona turned to face him, this pale, beautiful man who'd saved her life and stolen her heart. What if I said I wanted to stay? Not just visit, but stay. Share this life with you. Felix went very still. Fiona, you would have to give up the sun, your mortal life. Everything you've known, I know. And I'm not saying I want to turn tomorrow or even next year. But eventually, Felix, I don't want to grow old while you stay young. I don't want to have 50 years with you and then leave you alone again. If there's a way for us to have forever, I want it. You would become vampire for me? For us, Fiona corrected. I'm not the same person I was 6 months ago. Marcus's death changed me. You changed me. I'm stronger now, braver, and I know what I want, a life with you, however that looks. Felix pulled her close, his embrace fierce. I do not deserve you. Too bad. You're stuck with me. Fiona pulled back enough to see his face. So what do you say, Vampire King? Want to make me your queen officially? Felix laughed, joy suffusing his features. Are you proposing to me, Dragomia? I think I am. So what's your answer? Yes, Felix said and kissed her. Yes, 1,000 times yes. They married that summer in the castle's ancient chapel. A small ceremony attended by Felix's most trusted vampires and Fiona's few remaining friends. Detective Martinez came, and Dominic Ashford, and even Marcus's parents, who'd grown fond of Felix and understood their daughter-in-law needed to move forward. Fiona wore white, a simple gown that made Felix's eyes shine with tears. He wore black, elegant and timeless. And when he spoke his vows in Romanian and then English, his voice shook with emotion. I promise to love you in all your days, mortal and immortal both, he said. I promise to be worthy of the gift you have given me, your heart, your trust, your future. I promise to honor the memory of those we have lost while building new memories with you. I promise to be yours, Fiona, until the stars burn out and the world ends. Fiona's vows were simpler but no less true. I promise to stand beside you in darkness and in light. I promise to love you with all the strength I possess. I promise to be your partner, your equal, your queen. I promise to choose you every day for all our days. They sealed the vows with a kiss that tasted of blood and wine and forever. And when the ceremony ended, when the small crowd cheered and the celebration began, Fiona felt Marcus's presence like a blessing. He would have liked Felix, she thought, would have approved of her happiness. Thank you, she thought, toward the sky, toward wherever Marcus's spirit had gone. Thank you for telling me to find Dominic. Thank you for leading me to Felix. Thank you for loving me enough to want me happy even after you were gone. The wind stirred, warm and gentle, and Fiona chose to believe it was Marcus's answer, his approval. His love continuing on, Felix found her standing at the castle window looking out over the mountains. Regrets? He asked softly. None, Fiona said, and meant it. I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be, as am I. Felix wrapped his arms around her from behind, solid and sure. Thank you for choosing me, Dragomir. Thank you for bringing light back into my darkness. We brought light to each other, Fiona corrected. She turned in his embrace, smiling up at her husband, her love, her vampire king. Now come on, we have a party to get back to and an eternity to plan. Felix laughed and let her pull him back toward the celebration, toward their future, toward forever. A year later, when Fiona was ready, Felix turned her. It was a careful process, 3 days of transformation that he guided her through with patience and love. When Fiona woke on the 4th day, immortal and powerful and forever bound to the man she loved, her first thought was of Marcus. I made it, she thought. I survived, I lived. I loved again. Thank you for believing I could. Then Felix was there, gathering her into his arms and welcoming her to her new existence. And Fiona let herself embrace it fully. This strange, beautiful second chance at life. This love that had grown from tragedy. This future that stretched out endlessly before them. She was Fiona Andros now, vampire queen, wife to Felix, survivor of grief and murder and loss. She had honored Marcus's memory by refusing to let his death destroy her. By choosing to live boldly and love fiercely despite the pain. And as Felix kissed her, his queen and partner and equal, Fiona knew this was exactly how her story was meant to unfold. Not a replacement for the love she'd lost, but a continuation. A new chapter that honored the past while embracing the future. She had been a grieving widow who hired a silent bodyguard for coin. She had never guessed he was the vampire king. And now, impossibly beautifully, they were forever. Years passed, then decades. Fiona grew into her power in her role as queen, beloved by their people and feared by their enemies. She and Felix ruled together, partners in all things, their love deepening with each passing year. They traveled the world, collected memories, and built a life richer than Fiona had ever imagined possible. She never forgot Marcus. On the anniversary of his death, she and Felix visited his grave together, and Fiona told her first husband about her year, about the joy and adventure and love that filled her days. She told him about Felix and the life they'd built, and she chose to believe that Marcus was happy for her. Thank you, she whispered to the gravestone each year. Thank you for leading me to Felix. Thank you for your final gift of love. Felix always stood close during these visits. understanding that Fiona needed this, needed to honor what she'd lost while celebrating what she'd found. He never rushed her, never made her feel guilty for the love she still carried for Marcus. Instead, he made space for it, accepted it as part of who Fiona was. That acceptance was perhaps the greatest gift he could have given her. One night, a century after they'd met, Fiona and Felix stood on the balcony of their castle, watching the stars wheel overhead. Fiona had been vampire for 99 years now, and immortality fit her like a second skin. "Do you ever regret it?" Felix asked. "Choosing this life?" "Never," Fiona said immediately. "How could I regret a century of happiness with you, even knowing what you gave up? The sunlight, the mortal life, growing old naturally. I gave up one beautiful thing and gained something even more beautiful forever with you." Fiona turned to face him, her vampire husband, the love of her second life. "Besides, I've learned something important over the last century." "What's that?" "Love isn't about replacing what you've lost. It's about having space in your heart for multiple truths. I loved Marcus, I love him still. And I love you, desperately and completely. All of this is real. All of this matters. My heart is big enough for both." Felix pulled her close, pressing his forehead to hers. "I love you, Fiona Andros, my queen, my heart, my forever." "I love you too," Fiona whispered. "Thank you for finding me, thank you for saving me. You saved me as well, Dragami. You gave me purpose again, hope again, love again. I was merely existing before you, now I live." They stood together under the stars, this vampire king and his queen, and Fiona thought about the path that had brought her here. The tragedy and grief. The bodyguard who'd appeared at her door like an answer to a prayer. The slow building of trust and love. The choice to keep living even when it hurt. She had been broken by Marcus's murder. Felix had helped her heal, and together they had built something beautiful from the ruins. This was her happily ever after, hard-won and complicated and absolutely real. Not the ending she'd imagined when she was 22 and marrying Marcus, but a good ending nonetheless. A true ending. An ending that honored all she'd been through and all she'd become. "Come," Felix said, taking her hand. "Let us return inside. The night is young and I wish to dance with my wife." Fiona laughed and let him lead her back into the castle, into the warmth and light and love they'd created together. Behind them, the stars watched over the mountains. Eternal witnesses to a love story that had begun in grief and ended in joy. The grieving widow had hired a silent bodyguard for coin, never guessing he was the vampire king. But he had been exactly what she needed: protector and partner, lover and friend, the one who'd reminded her that life was worth living even after unbearable loss. And they lived, truly lived, happily ever after.